we can take those fairy dust moments and teach our brain to look for more of that, to get our brains working for us instead of against us.
Hi there, I'm Denise. I started this fully alive journey after winning a pretty tough battle with cancer. I came away with a whole new perspective and appreciation for life. Now, as I'm leaning into retirement, I'm discovering and sharing practical ways to live a fully alive life for many years to come.
So I discovered this happiness hack about 15 years ago, and it's been a real game changer for me. The fear and anxiety and shame that seemed to have a hold of my life, has now given way to joy and fun and happiness. I still have my struggles and, I can get better at this, but, I am not where I used to be. When I first started this happiness hack, it was really hard. It was new for me and I didn't have much traction, but now it's much easier. And that's so encouraging to know that when you start something new, expect it to be a little more challenging, but the encouraging thing that keeps pulling us forward is it does get better. It does get easier. So it's simple, not always easy, but like I said, I continue to use this happiness hack to dial up the happiness in my life, to keep my happy tank full. So are you ready? This happiness hack is about finding and sprinkling our day with fairy dust. Doesn't that sound fun? So the science side of this is that our brains can be programmed to receive positive, healthy thoughts and emotions, or it can be programmed to receive only negative, toxic emotions. This was so empowering when I first heard about this. Two people can be dealing with the same circumstances. Children can be raised in the same family, and yet they can see life so very differently. And again, this isn't something that is set in stone, that we get to play a part in this. So, they say ignorance is bliss. Well, in my case, in this situation, ignorance was costly. It was expensive. It was costing me the joy in my life and how I experienced this very precious gift of life that we all have. One psychologist explained it this way, and this really helped me. So, in your brain, you have these dendrites, which are kind of like branches on a tree. And in those branches are like leaves. And throughout the day, things are deposited on those leaves, those emotions, the way we experience life get deposited on these leaves in our tree. And those deposits, whatever stays in those leaves for 24 to 48 hours, begins to train our brain to look for and receive more of the same. Wow. Isn't that a powerful statement? That if we can have some influence on what stays in those leaves of our trees for 24 to 48 hours, we can begin to change the way our brain receives and processes the world around us. Now, like I said, I was ignorant of this and I had a lot of negative things in my life early on and had programmed my brain to see those, to look for fearful things and to be anxious about things. And shame seemed to be a real part of the way I processed the world. And I had low confidence and self-esteem. I don't know if any of you can relate to any of those things, but none of that is fun. None of that sounds like a fulfilling life. So when I started cooperating with the science of this, it changed everything. So I call this looking for and enjoying the fairy dust in our day. Let's look for some fairy dust moments that are in every part of our day. We all have something in our day that is positive. And again, early on when I did this, it was a lot harder to find these. Even when I have challenges on a day that it's hard to find anything, I can. I have gotten better at this. My brain is more receptive and my brain is working for me. It's looking for the positive things in my day. So we're going to take just a few minutes and to throw out some ideas that may resonate with you and help you begin to look for those fairy dust moments in your day. We all have them. They're all there. And like I said, we just need to learn to see them. Maybe for you it's a Starbucks coffee and that just makes you feel special and it's a moment. So let's not let that moment slide by unnoticed, but let's be intentional and just let that rest in the leaves of our trees. So other fairy dust moments in your day. It could be as easy as a nice new pair of shoes or a new outfit that you look really good in. It's like, this is my color. Take a minute, stand in front of the mirror and say, I look good today. This is really a nice outfit. That's just a moment. You're going to wear that outfit today. Let's make sure we're using it to work for us. Let's let that settle in the leaves of our tree for just a little while. One of the probably bigger fairy dusts in my life is when I know that I'm going to be finishing up a project, either at work or at home. Now, I love finish, complete, done. Those are happy words in my vocabulary. And so if I know that I've got a project that I've been working on and, it's all the pieces are coming together, and today's the day that I'm going to wrap that up and call it done. That's a fairy dust supercharged for my life. My husband, I guess his probably supercharged fairy dust would be a great golf game. He gets up in the morning and gets his breakfast, does his exercises, stretches, and he's got a tea time with his friends. That just gets him charged. Those are puts the happy on his face and puts the fairy dust in the leaves of his trees. And now after the golf game is over, he can come home and allow those good emotions. He can kind of play with those for a little while and tell me about all the great shots he made, what his score was, and that helps keep that fairy dust, those emotions, in the leaves of his trees. And he could come home and tell me about all the terrible shots. Golf, I don't get it, but he loves it. And it's never a perfect game. So it's, where does he want to put his focus? Does he want to put it on all the bad shots he made and let that emotion rest in the leaves of his trees? Or does he want to choose to look at all the great shots he made? So other, I don't know, everyday life occurrences that we can be intentional about in finding the fairy dust and letting them rest in the leaves of our trees. Maybe it's lunch with your friends. I know I'm going to go out to lunch today with my friends, and, start playing with that fairy dust early on in the day, even before lunch happens. I do that with vacations all the time. Is planning the vacation is almost as fun as taking the vacation. So if you can stretch out your fairy dust moments, that really helps that 24 to 48 hour window that we're working with. So if you're having lunch with friends, maybe, think about what you're going to wear or what restaurant you're going to. But, you're going to have lunch with friends. Let's use that, let's optimize that to get those happy emotions, those things that we want to be able to see and enjoy and receive more in life. Maybe it's your Zumba class. You got a new Zumba class starting up and you always feel so good. Just the endorphins from exercise, that's a great way to really optimize your fairy dust. So, whatever it is for you in the day, we all have those moments. We all have fairy dusts in our day. And too often we just let them go by. And so if we can begin to see them, and again, seeing them at first can be a challenge, but see them and then intentionally let them be a part of our life, our thoughts for 24 to 48 hours. But you gain momentum about finding the fairy dust in your life. So, real quick before we continue, if you're enjoying this content, I just invite you to like and subscribe and hit that bell so that you get a notification whenever these videos are posted. It also does some great fairy dust wonders to YouTube's algorithms, back to how to take these fairy dust moments and optimize them. So, one of the things that I often do at the end of the day is I'll ask my husband, so what was the best part of your day? And then I'll share the best part of my day. Isn't that a great question? What was the best part of your day? We all have a best part. No matter how rough your day was, there is a best part. But this whole exercise of having to go through my day and think about the best parts, that's a really good exercise. And if you know that's going to be coming up at the end of the day, as you sit around the dinner table and you're going to share your best part of the day, you can connect with that throughout the day. And these are some good things in my day. And again, this is that whole exercise of allowing the positive things in our life to reside in the leaves of our trees. I just love that analogy. One other thing before we wrap up here that I like to do is in the evenings, when I'm lying in bed and trying to turn off my brain and get to sleep, is I'll go through my day and I'll find, a few of those fairy dust moments and hold on to them, think about them, make sure they're laying in the leaves of my tree before I go to sleep. And, that's just a great way to end your day. Who doesn't want to fall asleep on a pillow full of fairy dust? So we can never have too much fairy dust, whether it's savoring that cup of coffee in the morning or finishing up a project at home or at work or that new Zumba class or new outfit. With just a little bit of intention and thought, we can sprinkle fairy dust all over the leaves of our trees and tell our brains we want more of that. This is what we want to experience. We can do this. This is so powerful. And like I said, yet so simple. So I'd love to hear about the fairy dust that you found in your day. Please feel free to leave a comment and perhaps read others' comments about their fairy dust moments. We can help each other get better at this. So until next time, ciao.